Hello everybody, welcome back to Eternal Basics. This is the Shadowstrike deck, and today we're going to be talking about theme and synergy as we remake this deck in the image that we want. So we've made 4 different decks so far, and each of those decks has had a particular archetype to it, which would be what I would consider 4 of the core archetypes of Eternal. We've had the Aggro Deck, which is concerned primarily with reducing your opponent's health to 0 and making sure that they die before they can use their resources. We have the Tempo Deck, or the Beatdown Deck, which is focused around building very, very efficient threats and trying to gain as much early advantage and build that into a snowballing win. We have the Mid-Range Deck, which was an attempt to play just value, 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 and overwhelm your opponent with very, very good cards. And finally, we had the Control Deck, which was aimed around denying our opponent resources and making sure that they were essentially just going to lose on account of the small, simple cards that we had. And the Control Deck is the closest deck that we have had to what we are going to be doing today, which is narrowing down to a specific theme and a specific set of cards. And so this is not a deck archetype. This is a deck idea that we're going to focus on. What you might call this deck, and this is something that you can argue about in card games, is a combo deck. Most combo decks are usually defined by the ability to play a couple of different cards and win the game extremely fast. So a combo deck aims to kill your opponent by playing several cards in rapid succession with each other, such that these cards combo together and either destroy your opponent's life total or generate such an amazing advantage for you that your opponent has no choice but to forfeit, or that you can just win the game from there. So they try to make an impossible position for your opponent. What we're going to be doing is focusing on small combos, so basically just simple synergy between cards, because we don't need a large combo to win out the game. And in particular, what I'm going to be focusing on is the Infiltrate subtheme. So if you haven't been in purple, purple is... I don't think we've done any Infiltrate cards in blue. We might have had a Yeti Snowslinger in there, but the Infiltrate ability, of course, reads that if you damage a player, then a particular thing happens. And that happens only once the first time that you damage them. This is only if you are attacking with the unit, or if you are doing something to cause the unit to damage the unit. Getting attacked with weapons won't trigger it. So kind of important to understand all of the different aspects of Infiltrate before we get into this. Now, there are some really strong Infiltrate cards in common and uncommon, so that's a good place to start when we're building out this deck subtype. And first things first, let's cut a bunch of stuff that we don't really like. Alright, we have Vampire Bat, a 1/1 flying lifesteal card. This card is mostly good if you have other weapons in your deck, because it has very good synergy with cards like Blackguard's Sidearm. So if you have a sidearm on a Vampire Bat, it's suddenly really, really hard to block. I mean, it's already flying, but now it's got quick draw as well, so it's pretty likely to deal with any small flyers that are in the air. And then it also has lifesteal, so it's going to be stealing health for you and making it so that your opponent can't compete with you by attacking you underneath the Vampire Bat. So that's an interesting combo, but it's not a very helpful one for us, because putting weapons on units can be very disadvantageous due to the fact that most decks are going to be running removal that can kill a 1/1 unit. And if that happens, Blackguard's Sidearm falls off, we lose 2 cards, they probably only spend 1. What if they have a Vara's Favor? What if they have a Torch? What if they have basically any type of card that can do just 1 damage? That Vampire Bat is going to go under the bus. So this is a combo, and it's a really interesting one, and it will help you out in certain games against AI units or AI players, and even some players who don't have their removal stacked, but here it's not helping us. So we're going to cut that out, and we're going to cut the sidearms as well. Well, we might keep the sidearms in. We'll look at that in a second, but I think we're going to cut them. Next, we're going to cut some vanilla units. We've talked about value propositions and evaluating cards. These are cards that just flat out fail the vanilla test. We have a 4 power, 4/3, kind of a weak card on the 4 cost slot. It doesn't have any synergy with any other cards because it's a blank vanilla creature. It's also got 4 attack, which makes it vulnerable to Vanquish and several fairly important removal spells, while also having 3 toughness, which is just the amount that you kind of are still vulnerable to torches, it's not really all that good on defense. Like, overall, this card's stats just don't work well to our purposes. The Direwood Rampager is a little bit better. It's a 6/4. That's still very stat inefficient, and the 4 health is, usually enough. But if this gets into a fight with anything at 5 cost or 4 cost, it's pretty likely to lose the fight, or rather just trade evenly, and the damage that it's dealing isn't usually enough to keep it in here. We much prefer the Horsesnatcher Bat, which is a 5/3, still vulnerable to Torch, but with flying and quick draw, it's much less likely to just trade evenly with something. This is a card that we can get rid of. Alright, so Scavenging Vulture we're kind of interested in, and I'll talk about that in a second, but Feln Assassin probably needs to go. This card is a 2/2 killer. It's notoriously bad at getting rid of units, which is kind of sad because it's really not that bad of a card for getting rid of cards that have Aegis or anything that has spell protection. But its stats are just a little bit too weak, so it usually doesn't trade well with anything that costs more than it or costs the same as it. And we can find better removal spells, so we'll probably put those in as we cut things out. Okay, anything else here that doesn't look particularly good? Spirit Drain. It's a fairly inefficient removal spell. It costs 6 power, and we're hoping to actually get to a point where we can end the game before we start having to cast Spirit Drains at 6 power just to remove 1 unit. Overall, this isn't a great amount of stats dealt due to the way that cards tend to increase in value as they cost more and more. A lot of 6 power creatures are going to be 7/7s and 6/6s, so Spirit Drain becomes less useful once we actually are able to cast it. That's a card that can go out. Okay, and finally I'd say Amethyst Acolyte is probably going to go. This card has a nice little lifesteal sub-theme. It's a little bit interesting because it does deal damage to the enemy player, but there's some aspects of it that we don't like, specifically the fact that it's got such weak stats. Once again, it's really vulnerable to just about anything that deals 1 damage, and we have so many creatures that have just 1 health in this deck that we kind of want to cut this as well. Alright, that's a pretty good start. I'm going to keep Ravenous Thornbeast and Dark Wisp in here for the moment, but if we decide to cut these out, we can certainly narrow the focus of the deck even further, and that's going to be an idea. Alright, so looking at our commons and uncommon cards, we're going to try a sub-theme, and that is Infiltrate Cards. We want to run cards that have Infiltrate, specifically Lethrai Ranger, Blood Beetle, Desperado, and Beastcaller's Amulet. All of these cards say that if you can actually attack into your opponent, this will do something the first time that it damages the enemy player. So Blood Beetle will get an extra attack and gain flying. That's a pretty neat effect. Let's put 4 of those in. Lethrai Ranger will get +2/+2, becoming a 4/4 for 2. That's very good stats for a 2-drop. And as you can see, both of these cards are offering something like double the stats that you'd expect to get for their power. Lethrai Ranger is a pretty solid aggressive creature, and we're happy to put it in here. Beastcaller's Amulet offers an even better card, a 5/5, along with an extra 1 attack on the cards that we're using. This card is actually a reason why you might even consider playing Vampire Bat. We certainly like it on small flyers, and Scavenging Vulture is probably going to be a card that we leave in because Beastcaller's Amulet is a real card. So let's go ahead and put 4 Beastcaller's Amulets in here. Okay, finally we have Desperado, which is a 3/2 that when it infiltrates, kills an enemy unit. And this card at an uncommon is not bad at all. It's quite good at removing threats from the board, and can usually force your opponent to basically not attack you because he fears the Desperado coming in and swinging at you. So we're going to throw in, let's say 3 of those. Up at the top, we have cards like Cabal Recruiter. That one's not bad. I might throw 1 of these in here just for a little bit of extra oomph, but overall, we're not going to worry too much about that. And it looks like we missed 1 card here on the removal side. We have Sinister Warlock, which is, once again, very, very inefficient creature. The summon effect gives an enemy unit -1/-1. That's not powerful enough removal for our needs. We're going to cut that too. Once again, it's kind of late game removal, and we're looking for something a little bit earlier. Okay, so now we have a heavy Infiltrate sub-theme. And that is the basic idea of what we want to do with this deck. We want to try to get these creatures down early. We want to make them into very, very big creatures by attacking with them quickly. And then we want to basically win out on the advantage that we build by hitting our opponent with these infiltrate creatures. To that extent, we have to make sure that we have some cards that can allow us to do that. Now, the obvious pick here is a card called Ghostform. Ghostform is a one-cost card that gives a unit lifesteal and unblockable this turn. Now this card costs an entire card to use, so it's not going to be a heavy pick in our deck. Like overall, this card doesn't do quite enough for its ability because it doesn't provide any extra card advantage, it doesn't provide any board advantage, and the health advantage that it gets you is pretty minimal. The main thing that this card does is allow you to get through with an infiltrate effect when you really, really need it. So if you've got stacked infiltrate effects, then Ghostform's kind of helpful. Since it's a card that we know we don't want to have lots of in our hand, we're only going to play 1 to 2 of these, and I'm going to go with 2 just to, you know, sort of even things out a little bit. Now, since we're attacking a lot with infiltrate creatures, the card Rapid Shot becomes very, very effective. This card gives a unit +4 attack and quick draw this turns. That means it will make it so that any attacking creature will basically not do damage, will basically get killed, or any blocking creature will get killed by our attackers. This kind of threat is pretty important for a purple deck that's going to want to be constantly attacking, so we'll throw that in as well. Alright, Direfang Spider can come out as well. We don't really need that card except to defend ourselves, and we're trying to do a lot more early game stuff. So let's throw in some Annihilates. Probably 3 to 4 of these. I think 3 is good. And finally, we still want to clear more of the board early on, so we're also going to throw in some Suffocates. And for that, we have to make 4 more spaces available. Okay, so thinking about what we want to make available, we have Ashara the Deadshot. She's not bad. Soul Collector is a card that basically is a slow game card. It capitalizes on other units dying. It can be very, very good if you are killing a lot of units, but it's very, very vulnerable when we put it out. And we're trying to do something, again, that's a bit more aggressive early on. So we'll probably cut Soul Collector. Impending Doom stays because it's a nasty flyer that we can play down pretty easily. It's also a fun rare. Lethrai Falchion stays because it has unique synergy with the cards that we're already playing. And Ravenous Thornbeast can probably stay because it has some synergy with Dark Wisp, which is a card that I'm not really willing to get rid of just yet. But we might have to cut it anyways because it looks like we're just a little bit short on space. So yeah, let's go ahead and get rid of the Ravenous Thornbeast and 2 of the Dark Wisps. And that way we have space for our Suffocates and our Annihilates, and we can actually add in just a little bit more. We're going to go ahead and increase the number of Scavenging Vultures here to 4. Okay, and let me just set that up so that it's not making it difficult to see how many of each of these cards we have. Yeah, that looks good. Alright, so this is our basic deck. Now, you can click on this thing here to give a full readout. I think I may not have covered that before, but yes, if you click on the curve, you can look at all of the stuff in our deck. We can see that we have enough units, quite a few spells, very few attachments, which is intentional, and 25 power at the moment, which I think should be okay. So yeah, that's a full 75 card deck. That looks pretty good to us, so I think we're going to stick with that. And as you can see, we have a pretty solid Infiltrate subtheme. Let's try the deck out and see how it plays. Alright, so looking at our hand, we certainly can't keep this because it only has 1 power. Pretty easy throwback. The next hand is interesting. Vara the Fate Touched isn't a card we're likely to be able to play, but Direwood or Lethrai Ranger actually helps us out quite a bit. If we can play that down on 2, we're going to be pretty happy. We're on the draw, which is not our favorite position with an Infiltrate deck. We usually want to be playing our creatures out earlier than our opponent can respond to them. So it's much, much better if we can do something like that. My opponent is playing blue and yellow with a little bit of red mixed in. And he's done something very, very bad for him, which is he has used up all of his power in one go. think at this point, there are a couple of different options that I could opt for. I'm relatively happy with the one where I just attack in and kill the Initiate, but it looks like he didn't block the Initiate, so we annihilate that to prevent him from getting his 4th power, or 5th power, and we'll play it on a Blood Beetle as well. Now, I'm looking for opportunities to play Beastcaller's Amulet, and the opportunity for Beastcaller's Amulet, if I don't have a flyer, is whenever my opponent is out of power. Permafrost, scary card. Now, the question is, does he have a Lightning Strike? That's a possibility, but I think that if he did have one, he might have waited and used it on Lethrai Ranger. I'm going to bargain that he doesn't, and play Beastcaller's Amulet on Blood Beetle. We attack in here. We get both infiltrates, the one that gives the Blood Beetle +1 in flying, and also the one that gets me a Direwood Beast. Now we have a decent amount of units on the board, and we're in pretty good shape. I know this deck. My opponent is playing my Crown Roaches deck, actually, from my Eternal Deck decks. So if you're interested in that deck, you can find it under, I believe it's called Phoenix Roaches, and it is Eternal Deck number 1. So let's go ahead and attack in here. We have 8 damage. Against a Crown Roaches deck, you generally want to be as aggressive as humanly possible. And fortunately, with our infiltrates, we've managed that. We have a very, very good advantage over our opponent. I'm happy to play down either Ashara or Desperado here. I think Ashara is more likely to put pressure on my opponent, so let's go ahead and do that. Now, since there's no Crown of Possibilities here, my opponent's most likely only going to be able to play Clock Roaches to defend himself, but World Pyre Phoenix is certainly an option. So here we are at an interesting situation. I can just sort of sit here and let that block. It can certainly get advantage over me if I just attack in. So if I attack with all 3 of my units, I deal an extra 3 damage, which puts my opponent on a very, very important clock, because Ashara the Deadshot can actually run in and kill him. And that's maybe more important to me than letting that thing live. Let's see here. Yeah, I think it's better to attack with everything here, because that puts my opponent on a 2-turn clock instead of a 3-turn clock. I lose the Direwood Beast, but I now have a much better chance of winning off of just the cards that I want to attack with. And if I draw a Rapid Shot, I can usually win just by sneaking 1 unit through. World Pyre Phoenix number 2 comes through, but we have our Rapid Shot, so all we have to do now is sneak through with a little bit of damage. Alright, and we Rapid Shot this one, not this one. And we have the win. So that game went very well because its core ideas, the idea of playing lots of simple creatures that are just going to be continually attacking in, basically just worked out for us. We got to get our infiltrates off, we got to get our value out of Direwood Beastcaller, and we got to do all of that because all of the cards in this deck, or at least most of the cards in this deck, are designed to work together in a way that's fairly helpful to me. So more on that in the postmortem. So we built this deck around a basic theme, and I would categorize that theme as Infiltrate. We wanted to make this into an Infiltrate deck. And that's a very specific subtype of deck. It isn't what you would consider a grander archetype, like aggro or control or tempo or mid-range. This is something where we simply said, I want to play cards that have Infiltrate. How do I best do that? And the way that we did that was twofold. First off, we picked cards that have good synergy with Infiltrate cards. Cards that reward us for attacking in constantly with these creatures that always want to be attacking and always want to be hitting your opponent. We picked cards like Rapid Shot that really, really like it when you attack. We picked cards like Ghostform that allow us to attack with Infiltrate creatures even when there's a field full of blockers. We picked cards like Lethrai Falchion, which has Overwhelm and therefore allows us to get that Infiltrate damage in and still get value even when we're trading. So we got all of these ideas together and we said, okay, here's an Infiltrate deck. But the other thing that we did that's just as important, I think, and probably bears mentioning right now, is we tried to fill in the deck a little bit by supplementing that strategy with other ideas. So we know that the main problem that Infiltrate decks have is that if your opponent gets a bunch of small creatures down early on and gets a bunch of blockers down, then we kind of get into trouble because we get into a situation where we can't attack usefully, and therefore our cards are actually less advantageous because they don't have very good stats if they can't hit your opponent and get that extra ability that they're talking about. So we tried to supplement that with a lot of removal. We used cards like Suffocate, Annihilate to get rid of creatures very, very early. We kept cards like Devouring, Shadow, and Deathstrike to keep creatures out of our way even later. And this also allows us to deal with a ton of other types of problems that this deck is very likely to face, such as, well, you know, Sandstorm Titans, or cards with like serious abilities like Explorer Emeritus, or something like that, where we have a lot of cards that will just wreck your day if you don't get rid of them. And we made sure that we had answers. So answers are a very important part of the theme as well. So think about both of these things when you're building a deck, but most importantly, do try to build decks around a theme, or do try to build decks around cards that combo well with each other, because that's one of the really nice things about Eternal and about many card games in general, is that a card is not valued on its single stats alone. You can't just look at it in a vacuum and say, this is a good card or this is a bad card. Most of the time, what makes a card work is other cards that support its strategy or that support the overall strategy that your deck is leaning towards. And the better you are at identifying these synergies, identifying these extra themes, the better off you're going to be at Eternal. This becomes more and more relevant as you're opening up chests and opening up booster packs, because rare and legendary cards are by design more likely to demand something in exchange for the value that they are offering. I'm thinking of cards like the Great Parliament, which is a card that specifically demands that you have a lot of power if you want to get a lot of value out of it, or cards like the Witching Hour, which want you to play lots and lots of small spells so that you can get that card out very, very early, or get that card out earlier than usual for a very, very cheap price. And a lot of legendaries and a lot of rares are built like that. So whenever you open up a pack and you see something cool, think about what you can build around it. And think about how it is that this card can support any number of particular deck types and ideas. Because that's a lot of the fun of Eternal, and a lot of the fun of Eternal deck building is just taking a single card and saying, okay, how does this work? What can we do with this if we add other cards into the mix? Where are the combos? Where are the synergies? What kind of stuff can we do that way? And I think that that's a really solid way to approach deck building in general. And I think it's just a really fun way to play Eternal. Yeah, so that should be it for today. Feel free to like or subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. This video was kind of a tough one, actually, but the next one should be very easy. We're going to be looking at Rakano Warcry deck, because we are going to be finally slipping into hybridization and putting the best parts of two of your decks together. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.